Jumping off cliffs, 7107. I've had times in my life that pushed me to the breaking point. I'm not alone in this experience. I also know that my hard times were not as horrible as many people have gone through. To me, at the time, they were almost unbearable. I thank God every day that these had been the limit of my trials in life. There are times in everyone's life that God will ask you to take a leap of faith. I call it jumping off cliffs because that is how it feels to me. God has helped me many times in difficult situations. Sometimes it was in small ways. Other times they were unbelievably huge. I'm going to share one of the really huge jump off a cliff times that I went through. I moved to Hawaii because my partner got a job there. I walked away from my circle of friends, my family. I walked away from a massage therapy practice that was doing well after 5 years of me building it. I thought I could just take the Hawaii RMT board exams and pick up where I left off. That did not happen. I could not practice my skills without that license. I started my farm raising goats and trees. I enjoyed my farm. The relationship with my partner deteriorated. There were problems before the move, but they seemed manageable at the time. Suddenly I went from business owner to unemployed. I went from a broad selection of friends to none. I did meet a few people that I liked through my partner's work. The problem was having to be on my best behavior all the time. There were no bars, clubs, social situations to meet other lesbians. I worked on the farm 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. As you can see, my interactions with people narrowed to basically one person, my partner. After 8 years, my feelings came to a head. I was lost. I wanted out, but felt trapped. I asked God to help me find a way. God told me to jump off a cliff, promising I would not be hurt if I had faith. I was willing to put everything in the hands of God. Everyone around me told me that what I wanted was impossible. I had all my resources tied up in the land, farm, and equipment. I wanted to come home to Texas. I had household stuff, of course, and I could not just walk away from everything with just a suitcase. The farm tools and household stuff would have to be shipped by some freight company that would charge me a fortune if they did it at all. I bought a container that could be put on a ship, a truck, and was allowed for shipping goods around the world. I had it dropped off at the house. I drove every tool, every log, everything from the farm to the house in my truck. I loaded them into the container. It was just barely fit in, all of it just barely fit in the container. I arranged a shipping date. My plane ticket was for the next day. The truck brought my container to the shipyard. When I got to the office to sign the papers, I hit a snag. They told me that a container with mixed good was not allowed. Also, they could not find a way to put my order in their system. I had only one container and was not a company. They told me that I would have to take the container back. It could not be shipped. There was no slot in their ledger to put my request. I was very calm, for God's sake. I sat down in their office and told them that they would figure it out. I was not leaving. It got later and later. Finally, at 4:30 p.m., a manager found a way. My container was accepted. I arrived home 4 weeks ahead of the expected arrival date of my container. My brother was going to let me store it on his farm until I found more land. That was not possible. It had been raining so much that there was no safe place to put the container. It would have sunk several feet into the soggy ground. I moved to Plan B. I started calling a storage yard that handled shipping containers. I met with 3 weeks of no, we don't do that, and roadblocks. The companies did not want a single container from an individual that I needed to access to. I called people who were suggested to me. I called everyone I could think of. I was getting a little worried at this point. Then a company on my list just felt right. I called to explain my situation. The receptionist was not in. My call was routed to one of the owners of the company. I didn't ask for it, but going to the top to solve my problems works for me. It was another miracle. I started telling this fellow about my goat farm, only to find out he had lived on a farm as a kid. It had been a cattle operation, but for pets, he had had a few goats. His company had the same rules as the others, but he said he would work it out. I asked how much it would cost me, only to be flattened by his quote. It was more than reasonable. In addition, he would have the container put on the ground instead of stacked, so that I could remove my household goods. I was overwhelmed, and thanked him, both him and God, who helped me find the way. When it came time for my personal stuff, all of the workers came from all over the yard to help me. They were wonderful men. My stuff had shifted, and the port had put some extra locks on the door, so they had to be cut off. These sweet men held up parts of the load while I pointed at stuff to remove. They were fascinated by my story about how God saved me. I started my search for land immediately. Every piece of property I looked at was flawed in some major way or too expensive. I kept a sheet describing them in my records. When I found the land I wanted, it was wonderful, but too expensive. I did a check on how long it had been on the market. It was over a year. I pulled out those rejection sheets and took the price to acre ratio and told the realtor that this was my offer. After showing my comparison sheets, they said yes. It was wonderful. Now it was time to get the container up to the land. That way it could safely sit on a rocky part I picked out. It would not cost me anything to store it once it was up on the land. I called the storage yard and asked how I would go about taking the container to the land. I explained there would be no equipment to unload it or a loading dock to take the equipment out through. They said that there was a kind of truck that could do it, but they did not have any of that kind in their truck fleet. They would have to find one for me. The date was set, and I arranged to meet the truck up there at my land. I went to the office to pay my storage bill and got a huge surprise. Even though it was several weeks into the next month, my balance was zero. The owner explained that it was just nice to know that he was helping God. He laughed and said he had no idea where to put the money from my container storage anyway. There just was no slot on the ledger. I thanked him for his kindness. All the guys came to meet me to say goodbye and Godspeed. I was crying at this point. When the trucker arrived at my property, it was raining heavily. The truck had to back through the gate to unload, and backing up went okay. Unloading was a problem. After getting to the spot to drop it, he had to move forward to let gravity pull it off the truck. His tires were not getting traction in the wet ground. I thought, please God, don't let this poor man get stuck. We were both soaked to the skin. After several tries, it worked. The container fell with a thump. He kept moving, not wanting to lose the slight momentum he had. He was on the road with my payment in hand in a few minutes. After thanking God, I started my 5-hour drive back to Houston. I was overjoyed and grateful. If I had taken the word of any one person out of the 30-plus people who had said, I could not be done, I would have failed. I let God be the only voice I listened to. I took my persistence. It took some persistence on my part. The difference was I knew I was not doing this jumping off a cliff alone. God was with me. God inspired the right people at the right times to make it all work out. There are 2 lessons here. First, trust God if help is offered, even if it is scary and seems impossible. Take that leap of faith. All things are possible with God. Second, if you happen to be in the right place at the right time and God asks you to help one of his little ones, do everything in your power to help them. Sometimes doing the right thing just does not have a listing in the ledger. God bless the whole world, no exceptions. Angel Alexa.